Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjanashalaakaya Chakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitamena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Namo Namo Aniruddhaya Hishikesha Indriyatmane Namah Paramahamsaya Purnaya Nivritatmane Swarga Pavarga Dwaraya Nityam Suchi Sade Namah Namah Hiranya Viryaya Chaturhotraya Tantave. Hare Krishna. So today is the 8th of October and we are gathered to further our discussion on the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the previous session, which was on Monday, we stopped at the first canto, second chapter, fifth verse. And today we will be continuing with verses 6 and 7. And if there is time, we would continue even further. We would do more verses. So I'm going to be sharing my screen and then we will begin the session. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayet. So the previous session we covered up to verses 1.2.5. And today, I was wanting to start afresh because this is somewhat of a more intricate topic, and I wanted to give a complete session, dedicate a complete session, as I was also expecting, some questions on this. I just wanted to give some room as well. Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, second chapter, verse 6. Savai pumsham paro dharmo yato bhaktir adokshaje Ahaituki apratihata yayatma suprasidati. Sah, that, why, certainly, pumsam, for mankind, parah, sublime, dharmaha, occupation, yataha, by which, bhaktihi, devotional service, adokshaje, onto the transcendence, ahaituki, causeless, apratihata, unbroken, yaya, by which, atma, the self, suprasidati, completely satisfied. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The supreme occupation, dharma, for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. Okay, this is verse 1.2.6. Verse 1.2.7. I would like to read both verses, then we could revisit them as and when it needed. verse 1.2.7, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitah Janayati Asu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayadahaitukam. Vasudeve, onto Krishna, Bhagavati, onto the personality of Godhead, Bhakti Yoga, contact of devotional service, Prayojitaha, being applied, Janayati, does produce, Asu, very soon, Vairagyam, detachment, Jnanam, knowledge, Cha, and yet that which Ahaitukam, causeless. So the translation is, by rendering devotional service onto the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires costless knowledge and detachment from the world. So first thing that we would like to do today is to understand the purport of the verses given by Srila Prabhupada, and for which we need to take reference of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Okay, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita has very clear reference of karma, action, has very good clear reference of what is the definition of dharma. Srimad Bhagavatam is quite adequate in explaining all of this in future verses, but for context and for also to be able to establish a link between those two scriptures, I wanted to also touch upon some of the precepts of action, dharma, so on and so forth. So now going back to Srimad Bhagavad Gita, in Bhagavad Gita, specifically the first chapter, we see some intense suffering experienced by Arjuna, and the intense mental suffering experienced by Arjuna has one particular theme, and the theme is, it's common, but there is one theme. He is practically identifying himself with his relatives. He has to perform the action of war. He has to act on war. He has to engage in warfare, but then he is identifying with his different relatives. That is the predominant theme of the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. When he is identifying with different relatives, he identifies with, for instance, Bhishma Dev, and says that this is my grandfather, and I feel extraordinarily sad that I am in a situation where I have to raise arms against someone, who is so close to me, my grandfather, Bhishma Dev. He then talks about Dronacharya. Arjun's identity of being a disciple of Dronacharya is coming forth in a very, very strong way. And he is practically, in tears, thinking that how could I lift up arms and fire arrows to hurt my spiritual master? He is everything, he is my guru. So how do I even, hurt him in any manner? So that is again the second form of suffering which he's experiencing, is with the relationship with guru. And then comes the cousins, and then comes the uncles, and so on and so forth. So he looks at all the people who are gathered on the opposite side, and there is one common theme in the first chapter, and that common theme is of the suffering of Arjuna in relationship to the warriors who are opposing him in the identity. He is practically identifying himself in a certain way, and the attachment that he has with the personalities who are on the other side of the battlefield is causing great mental suffering. So the common theme which is coming up here is that we cannot act unless we have an identity. You see, our own actions are completely dependent on our identity. And our identity, practically, our own actions are dependent on our identity. If without assuming an identity, one cannot act with clarity. What do we mean? See, one has to assume the identity of a parent to act as a parent. So there has to be a motivation of developing a very strong identity that I'm a father, and then I would be able to relate to my child in a certain way. Similarly, I will have to develop the identity of a son or a husband and so on and so forth with different relatives, and that allows me to act in a certain way. So even before we commit to any action, we have to first clearly identify ourselves in that relationship. So that is the first basis of today's argument, right? We have to identify ourselves. We have to develop an identity. Now, the identity itself is a prelude to our action. We cannot act without an identity. There will be great confusion if we do not assume a firm identity. And a lot of confusion that does result in this world is due to the fact that there's a crisis. People cannot prioritize between different identities. This was a specific challenge which was observed on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where Arjun had to assume the identity of Krishna's servant alone. He had to keep Krishna in the center, and then he had to put every other identity to the side, and he had to relate to the others based on Krishna's relationship to him. However, he was facing serious challenges before Krishna began sharing the precepts of the Bhagavad Gita. He was facing challenges because he was practically paralyzed. He had identified himself with Bhishma, he had identified himself with Drona, and he could not act. And this identity crisis, right? This identity crisis practically brought him down to tears. This was an extraordinarily potent military general. He was a pure devotee, a dear friend of Krishna, an associate of Krishna, standing next to Krishna, and he became completely bewildered because he could not act with clarity because there was an identity crisis. Okay? So that's the first thing that I would like to share today. What I would like to share is that before we act, we have to establish an identity. Now we'll go on to the next point. The next point which we want to talk about is that depending on the identity that we assume, okay, we produce desires. So if we assume the identity of a professional, the extent to which we assume the identity of a professional, let us assume that you're working for a certain organization. Okay, there were many during 2008 and 2009 who practically struggled to accept that Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns collapsed. You know, these were employees of Bear Stearns, these were employees of Lehman Brothers, and these were, you know, such well-known, such prominent, such strong institutions in the minds of employees that they could not believe that the institutions and the professional identity that they had assumed with an institution could be destroyed overnight. They could not even believe, they could not conceive that whole aspect of how all of this could collapse overnight. And this was an identity crisis. There was a suffering brought about due to the identity. So every one of us has an identity of a professional as well. So we develop desires to rise up in corporate life. We develop desires to move around in the professional space based on our identity of being a professional associated with a certain organization, having a certain position, and then we have superiors and we have subordinates, we have aspirations. All of this is based on that identity that I'm a professional associated with an organization. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because assuming an identity produces desires. It's very important. Underline this. If you assume an identity, you will develop desires. Depending on the identity, the desires could be conducive or non-conducive to devotional service. Depending on the identity, it can either be called pure desires or it can be lusty desires. Okay? So the identity that we establish as a professional, the identity that we establish in family, the identity that we establish in this world produces desires because we want to act on such identities. And once we want to act on such identities and it produces desires, then the desires themselves can be classified as whether we have a pure desire or a lusty desire, depending on what our desires are and what the identity itself is. So what are we trying to get at? What we're trying to say is that depending on the identity, our own identities are assumed based on consciousness. Higher the consciousness, greater would be the identification with devotional service. Higher the consciousness, greater would be the identification with Krishna consciousness, greater would be the identification with Vraja, greater would be the identification with a specific, relationship with Krishna. Higher the consciousness, higher would be our perception of our eternal relationship with Krishna. So identifying ourselves with an eternal relationship would automatically produce desires as we exist in this world. There is a link. There is a clear link that as we exist 24/7, as we get out of bed and prepare for the day, and we are assuming a certain identity, we are also going to be building desires. Now, the opposite is, the greater the level of identification with Krishna, the more we have evolved in the relationship with Krishna, the more one knows the address of oneself in Braja, the more we won't know who we are, more we know who Krishna is, more we know who our relationship and what our relationship in Krishna is with, right? And our activities. Greater would be the purity of our existence and purity of our desires. Okay, a simple, very simple theory. One, you cannot act without identities. Two, if you establish an identity, you're going to be developing desires in relationship to the identity. Three, depending on the consciousness with which the identity has been established, the desires themselves could be conducive, in other words, could liberate us, or the desires themselves could be grounding and conditioning us even further in this world. The higher the consciousness, greater would be the ability for us to establish ourselves in Krishna consciousness. Greater would be the ability to establish an identity in relationship to Krishna. The fundamental identity that we come in touch with when we come in touch with ISKCON is that you are a servant of Krishna. It is established. You see? The very names that we are given. I'm called Sri Vrindavan Das. Someone else could be some other, Das or Dasi or so on and so forth. We are given this identity right at inception. If initiation is inception, we are given this identity that you're a servant of Krishna. Since you're given this identity that you're a servant of Krishna, and then we start acting on such identity, the greater our identification, the more effort we put in, the greater level of our being able to come closer to such identification, then higher would be our identification with our eternal relationship with Krishna. So the more serious we become with chanting, the more serious we become with service, the more serious we become with reading and association and so on and so forth. All of this is going to contribute to that eternal identity that is being established. And then we go from the fundamental identification that I am a servant of Krishna, and that particular identification, because the holy names are so potent, and when we chant and call upon the holy names, the identity within our heart is like a lotus. It begins blooming, and we begin seeing who we are. This is the first prayer of Shikshashtakam. Cheto Darpanamarjanam, right? Cheto Darpanamarjanam. Chittaha is like a mirror filled with dust. What is the dust? The dust is nothing but our identifying with different objects in this world. The dust is nothing but the impressions on our consciousness left by actions created by us and done by us in the past based on different identities unrelated to Krishna. The more we moved away from Krishna in acting and assuming an identity, the more obscure our ability to see who we are. The level of dust and the intensity of dust is far higher if we move further away from Krishna in establishing an identity. And this is seen by us, right? This is also seen by us. Sometimes we have to struggle. Sometimes it is easy. If there's a very intense day at work, we come home and we find it quite difficult for us to come back and make a 180-degree turn. So this is our life. So it's a very fundamental precept that you establish an identity, you start acting on the identity, you will develop desires based on the identity, and then those desires are either conducive or not conducive. They either keep you in Krishna consciousness or take you away from Krishna consciousness, depending on our own ability, our own consciousness, how high we are. Okay? So that's a fundamental precept that one has to realize. So what is preaching all about? Why do we have Srimad Bhagavatam? Why do we have Srimad Bhagavad Gita? Why should there be classes? Why should there be realizations? Preaching is all about modifying desires. Preaching is all about cultivating desires of wanting to come closer to Krishna, wanting to embrace the identity of being a servant of Krishna. That is preaching. In reality, that is actual preaching, is being able to enthuse the audience to further come closer to taking up Krishna consciousness so that they develop a deeper sense of who they are in relationship to Krishna. That is the whole purpose of everything. That is the whole purpose. We chant for that purpose. Attaining Krishna Prema is our goal. Attaining Krishna Prema being our goal, we chant the holy names, keeping that goal in mind. And the holy names, they blossom our heart. There's a seed. The seed of our relationship with Krishna it's a seed, and it is in the heart. The seed of our relationship with Krishna is in the heart. And we start watering it by reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. We start watering it by service. We start watering it by chanting the holy names very sincerely. That seed, fructifies it becomes a flower, it starts blossoming into a lotus. That lotus has all the details. It has all the details of who we are. The greater the level of unfoldment of that particular seed of bhakti which has been sown in our heart, greater would be our ability to completely identify with Vraja. Okay? And not be overwhelmed by the circumstances of the universe. So please keep that in mind when we talk about dharma, when we talk about duty. There has to be an identity. Without an identity, duty cannot be established. And that was the struggle of Arjun. That was the real struggle of Arjun. Arjun struggled in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita in being able to establish firmly the identity of being a servant of Krishna. He struggled, and this was Krishna next to him. He struggled. Of course, his challenge was far, far more intense than anyone would ever face. You know, I doubt if any of us would ever come into circumstances where we have to take up arms against, those who are related to us. That was his circumstance, very intense. However, our own circumstance, based on our capacity, could be intense. So the question is, the more intense our circumstances become, do we have the ability to establish the identity of Krishna consciousness in our heart before we act? Can you step out of your house in the morning with a very firm conclusion of who you are in the spiritual sky? If you can do so, if you can step out of your house with a firm conclusion of who we are in the spiritual sky, if you knew your address in Vraja, if you knew if you were in Nandagram or were you in some other village surrounding Vraja, and if you knew your name, and if you knew what service you had to perform in that particular day with Krishna, if you knew what kind of sweets your mother had prepared, which you're going to give to Krishna while you go and play with him, for instance. If you knew all of that before you took up your briefcase and walked out to work, then the identity at work is not going to bother you. So which was the whole conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita? Krishna ultimately brought Arjuna around to understanding Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi ma suchaha. He made him understand that there will be many dharmas, many kinds of duties that are going to come about because you have identities in the world. And the various identities in the world are going to bring forth duties. Based on all of these duties, there could be dharma. Dharma gets defined based on your identity. Okay? The specific activity that you ought to be performing. But over all of that is the dharma that you have to perform in relationship to me. You are related to me. That relationship is an identity. That identity produces a certain activity, dharma. You have to be able to act on your relationship with me. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja, right? Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi ma suchaha. He says that. Do not fear. Do not fear, take up the identity of being my servant and act upon that identity alone and see what happens. This is the message. So Krishna had to bring Arjuna from a typical situation of someone who has to deal with multiple identities where the identity of being a servant of Krishna is obscure. He had to bring him from that level back to a level of complete knowledge to remind him, Arjun, wake up. Sarva dharman parityajya. Put me in the center. Your identity is with me. And based on that identity, you have to act. Okay? That was the message of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, in that process, Krishna gave a couple of verses, right? I'm just going to share a couple of verses before we go back to Bhagavatam. It's very critical for us to understand, a message in a very good context. So the Bhagavad Gita is very useful because it's very precise in certain ways. And let's go back to the slide and we will see the verses. Right? Now, let's also understand this. Let's understand that many of us struggle during the day. Many of us do struggle during the day. And practically I would say every one of us struggles during the day because the day can be very overwhelming in its ability to take us away from our identity of being Krishna's servant. Okay? We really, at some point in the day, you start wondering, what am I doing? Is this even connected? What am I doing? And so on and so forth. Let us understand why that happened. Let me get back to this slide again. after sharing with you as to why is it that we struggle? Why is it that our present circumstances are a bit of a struggle? Why is it that our professional life or whatever we do is quite a challenge? The reason it is a challenge, or at least let me put it this way, some of us may say it's not a challenge, but it is not conducive either to Krishna consciousness. We don't really sit there at work and know every minute of the time when we are there that this is wonderful and we are here and it is enthusing us, and then we're going to go back and full of enthusiasm we're going to be able to do something. Sometimes, and most times that is, it can be a drag on our consciousness. We come back home quite overwhelmed, and sometimes it doesn't allow us to even carry out duties that we are supposed to perform, which we like doing in relationship to Krishna. Why is it that circumstances are so difficult for us today? Let's talk about today. The circumstances, be it in relationships, be it in career, be it in any kind of circumstances, are complex today because our desires in the past were not correct. Our desires in the past were of a lower consciousness. You see, in the past, we desired today's circumstances. Remember that our future is dependent on what we desire today. We have an opportunity to create a future. So as we desire today, the future gets created. Similarly, we desired in the past and the present was created. So if the present is very complex, our past is to blame because we didn't desire Krishna. That was the issue. The issue is 25 years back, 30 years back, whenever it is that we started desiring certain things in this lifetime, in the previous lifetime even, we were not desiring bhakti. Even for many of us who are in devotional service today, we don't desire bhakti. We don't. We have so many other wonderful desires which we want to fulfill. We don't desire bhakti, even being in devotional service. What to say of 30 years back, 20 years back, or when we were born, even before that. Even after receiving so many instructions, after coming in touch with Prabhupada's movement, after coming in touch with the holy names, after calling upon the holy names, after getting initiated once, twice, our desires are still not for bhakti. There's a challenge there. So our today's circumstances, if they're challenging to execute bhakti, it is because our desires in the past were not proper. We were not desiring to serve Krishna. If we really were desiring to serve Krishna, why would he make it so complicated? Why would he make it so complicated? So what is the message which we're trying to get at here? We are trying to get at the fact that today we have a very powerful message. And the message is that we have an eternal identity. Our eternal identity is like a street address in the spiritual sky. And this is a one-time opportunity. And then I'm using the word one time because there is no guarantee that we might have the same circumstances in future. There is no guarantee. There is no guarantee that we might be able to come back in touch. Who knows? Who knows? I do not want to go by the fact that, this is all I can do. Perhaps in some other lifetime, I will have an opportunity for me to be able to accelerate. Srila Prabhupada has given us whatever we need to go back in this lifetime. And we should have absolutely no other plan other than wanting to go back. And in what way? Our plan should be, our only goal in life should be that we attain Krishna Prema. If our desire today is to attain Krishna Prema, our desire today is to have exclusive devotion to the Lord and to assume the complete identity of being His servant, then our future, be it in this lifetime or the next, will be full of greater level of opportunities and lesser challenges. Understand that our challenges today are because we didn't desire to serve Krishna. Our challenges today were because we had complex desires to lead life in a complex way. And here we are. Today, if we desire that our life should be simplified and we would reach a point where we would be able to serve Krishna in wonderful ways without much distraction, then that would manifest as well. You see, one thing devotees have to remember, please remember this. When you pick up your beads, when you sit for your Gayatri, you're creating your future. Don't ever underestimate the potency of the holy names. Don't ever underestimate the potency of your holy names. Don't. If you pick up the beads, if you sit for your Gayatri, you engage in deity worship, be sure to write down what you want to manifest in the future. Because you might end up asking internally for something which is not conducive for devotional service. Therefore, please actively manage your desires when you chant. Many meditate on the fact that you want simpler circumstances where the challenge should be less. There should be greater level of opportunity. I should be able to spend more time. It should be less tenuous. All of these aspirations to reach the mode of goodness, for us to be able to engage more fully in devotional service, should be the active desiring process that you should be able to manage before you sit down to chant. If you don't do that, then the today is exactly what's going to manifest 5 years down the line. If we develop desires for professional success, then there would be professional success. There's no doubt about it. But is professional success going to guarantee my ability to chant? If we desire a very, very opulent situation, perfect, it might even manifest. But is that going to ensure that I can sit and chant? I can associate. So one has to be very careful in being able to desire while you're actively involved in a potent spiritual process. Why? Because today, whatever we are was a mixed bag. You see, it was a mixed bag of desires. At one point, we desired to come in touch with Srila Prabhupada's movement. We got in touch with Srila Prabhupada's movement. At another point, we have other desires of wanting to do certain things in life. And here we are. It's a mixed bag. And sometimes it is very complicated mixed bag. Sometimes it is somewhat easily manageable mixed bag. So now it's an opportunity for us to create a future which is not so much of a mixed bag. Something which is more clear, where there's clear aspiration. There's very clear aspiration of saying that, okay, I do not want complexity. I want simplicity. Because simplicity is required for advancement. It is a must. Not everybody can move forward in a complex environment. You cannot really have a very complex 24/7 day, 8-hour day, come back and then have a somewhat, wonderful evening. It's difficult because by the time you turn your mind around and focus on things, you might lose a lot of energy. So that is the other point that we wanted to establish as well. Okay, these are very critical points. And then the Bhagavad Gita, 4.34. Let's see, if you have the Bhagavad Gita, you can go to 4.24. I'm sorry. 4.24. Krishna says this. He talks about it in transcendental knowledge. He's telling Arjun, your complication is because you are identifying with the many different personalities. And he's talking about it. Okay? Yeah. So, text 23, 4.23. Gata sangasya muktasya jnanavastita chetashaha yajñarcharatah karma samagram praviliyate. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. So if someone is working and he is unattached to the modes of material nature, how come? How is it possible for someone to be unattached? Because he's fully situated in knowledge. If someone understands they are a person, they don't belong to this world. If someone understands that they are not a part of this world, they have real experiences of Raja, then they don't have any issue in being able to execute activities in this world, and the activity of this world does not overwhelm them. Okay? Text 23. Krishna is giving us secrets in 4.23, 4.24 on how to engage in this world and yet be transcendently situated. 2.4. Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagno Brahmanahutam Brahmaivatena Gantavyam Brahmakarma Samadhinam. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Because the person internally has developed the consciousness of being a servant of Krishna to such a deep level that the external activity doesn't matter. What did Arjun do eventually on the battlefield? He murdered, right? If you look at it literally, Arjun murdered. But why is it devotional service? Why is it karma in full knowledge? Because he acted with complete knowledge that this is what Krishna desired. Because he acted with the identity of being Krishna's servant and he understood completely that Krishna wanted this, then such activity did not touch him. You see, such activity was glorious. So that is the whole idea. The idea is full contribution to spiritual activities in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. that which we offer on a daily basis to Krishna will be of a spiritual nature if we become absorbed in Krishna consciousness. The greater the level of absorption in Krishna consciousness, which means greater our ability to understand who we are in relationship to Krishna, to that extent, the activity that we perform externally would be less cumbersome to us. Okay? So if there is any desire in our heart, since we have entered into devotional service, it should be for complete absorption. Manmanabhava madbhakto, Krishna prema. There should be no other desire. Everything else will simply fall in place if you have that big desire. Cultivate that desire actively, and at the same time ensure that whatever you do during the day is done well. Okay, that is what we ought to do. We ought to tolerate our circumstances because we have created it in the past. Ask for better circumstances so that we could devote ourselves more and engage fully. This is our role today. That is what we ought to do. The key difference is, in the past, we did not desire 100% of wanting Krishna very badly. Now we have the opportunity to do so because of the chanting of the holy names, coming in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam, with Srila Prabhupada's writings, and devotees, and devotional service, and so on and so forth. Now we have an opportunity to desire actively. So if we desire actively, then the future gets created where our own circumstances, the surroundings would be transformed, where the opportunity would be even greater. We would be able to remember even more. Okay? So that's very important to understand these two verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, now let me go into Bhagavatam. Okay? And let's see what we can share from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay. So what do these two verses say? Let's go back to the translation. Verse 1. Savai pumsam parodharmo yato bhaktir adokshaje. So what does the word adokshaja mean? Adokshaja literally is Krishna, the Supreme Lord, who cannot be perceived through material senses. Adokshaja, someone who is beyond material senses. Ahaituki, apratihata. So these two words have to be defined. Ahaituki. What does ahaituki mean? Hetu means a cause. Ahaituki means causeless. So the context of, causeless is something which we can talk about for a couple of minutes before we go into rest of the translation. What is the meaning of causeless? Okay. What is the meaning of ahaituki? We hear that in both verses. We will hear it throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam. Causeless. What does causeless mean in different contexts? The first definition of causeless is bhakti rasa, our connection with Krishna, has no material cause. Ahaituki. He is adokshaja. Adokshaja is one who has transcendental senses, someone who cannot be perceived through material senses. Right? Premanjana churita bhakti vilochanena. One is able to see Krishna because the ointment of love has been applied to their eyes. Then one is able to see Krishna. Okay? He cannot be perceived by material vision. He can be perceived by transcendental vision because he is adokshaja. He is transcendental. His senses are not material. They are transcendental. They cannot be perceived by material senses. Okay? He is adokshaja. So there is no material cause. So that is one definition of ahaituki. Now, the second definition of ahaituki is that we don't have any qualification whatsoever. The second definition and the context is we have no qualification whatsoever to come in touch with Krishna. Okay, so if at all we are developing and coming in touch with bhakti rasa, if at all we are coming closer to Krishna, it is because of the causeless mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Without Gauranga, there is no question of Krishna for us. It was his causeless mercy. So that is the reason why we can say it is ahaituki, because we have no qualification. Because if you're going to talk about meritocracy requires that you perform in a certain way, you be qualified in a certain way, and you be rewarded for it. What qualification do we have to chant the holy names? What qualification do we have to worship the Archa Vigraha? What qualification do we have to be associated with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? What qualification do we have to come in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam? So this is ahaituki. It is costless. The mercy is costless. So that is the other definition, that this ahaituki, okay, it is completely costless to come in touch with that which has no material cost, to come in touch with the transcendental senses of Krishna, Krishna who cannot be perceived with material senses, adokshaja. One has to have received extraordinary kripa, Mahaprabhu's kripa. That is the other definition of ahaituki. Now, what is apratihata? Apratihata is uninterrupted, that which has no interruption whatsoever. You see, bhakti can be interrupted in two ways. How can it be interrupted in two ways? It's almost like, someone takes grains of sand and then puts it into kheer. So when you take a spoonful of kheer, that kheer is very tasty, it's delicious. But then you put the kheer in your mouth, and part of it is kheer, it's very sweet, and the other part is grainy because it has got sands in it, sand particles. You see, that happens when there is interference in the process of bhakti. It is not apratihata, it gets interrupted. The nature of pleasure on the planet is pratihata. It's always interruptions. Nature of pleasure is always interruptions. That is why we call it fleeting pleasure. Everything in this planet, all kinds of material pleasure, is fleeting. Life is fleeting in the larger context. Life is fleeting. So what to say of pleasure, which is permanent? And the soul, that is a real us, we are spiritual by nature. We are Satchidananda. Krishna is Satchidananda. Unless we come in touch with Krishna, and that contact with Krishna is Sat, that which does not change, there is no interruption, then our own ability to experience Ananda is very limited. Our own ability to experience Ananda is very limited. So what are the two interruptions to bhakti? There are two interruptions. Our acharyas talk about two main interruptions to bhakti. What are they? Srila Rupa Goswami is very clearly defined. Why is it the Paribhasa Sutra of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu? Why did he say Anya Bilashita Shunyam? Okay. The earlier part of my class today on Bhagavad Gita was Anya Bilashita. If you have Anya Bilashita Shunyam. Shunyam. Zero. Zero of any other desire other than the desire for self-preservation. And self-preservation is defined as, what if I am attacked, I'm mauled, what if somebody comes and, tries to attack me? Can I call upon Krishna? Will that be considered to be a negation of purity? No, that is acceptable. So self-preservation is acceptable, Anya Bilashita, Shunyam. Everything else is Shunyam. Jnana Karmadi Anavritam. Two interruptions to bhakti. One is jnana and the other is karma. If there are fruitive desires, desires of wanting to obtain a certain fruit by worshipping Krishna, obtain a certain fruit by engaging in the chanting of the holy names, obtaining and arranging for certain things. If we have desires, if we are afraid that our desires won't be fulfilled, that is a big interruption to the process of experiencing pure devotional service. It cannot be apratihata. It is pratihata. There's an obstacle there, there's an interruption, and that interruption is fruitive desires. That is why Rupa Goswami says, Anya Bilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karmadi Anavratam. Give up this whole objective of fruitive desires, desires of wanting to act with other desires, desires other than prema, desires other than Krishna prema. When we have desires other than Krishna prema, life is too cumbersome. One has to live in fear. One cannot be fearless. One cannot be fearless unless their only objective is Krishna prema. If there are other desires, then they would be fearful. There will be fear, 100%. Okay? And then it becomes fruitive. Now, this is much better than those who don't even come in touch with Krishna. But the fact remains that fruitive desires, karma, karmakanda, interrupts the flow of bhakti rasa. It interrupts the flow of exchange of the wonderful, extraordinary bhakti rasa, which is so sweet to taste. That ananda is interrupted. Why is it interrupted? Because there is no truth to our pursuit. Fruitive desires are desires to fulfill fleeting moments. Since the fleeting moments in themselves are fleeting, they're going to come and go, there is no truth, there is no Sat. Obviously, the person who has a lot of fruitive desires has a problem with Chit Vaibhava. They don't have a proper identification of who they are with Krishna. So both Sat and Chit are extraordinarily impaired in that activity. Because Sat and Chit are impaired, how can Ananda flow nicely? So where is the question of Apratihata? This is Pratihata if there is going to be fruitive desires. Okay, so that is the first lesson that we ought to learn, is that it is an issue. It is an issue. Its issue is that our own desires become stumbling blocks to our being able to experience complete bhakti rasa. Develop the desire for prema and have that as the only objective, and everything else becomes subservient and everything else will disappear. Then there is no fear. The next fear or next interruption is from jnana. Jnana, in literal sense, is jnana is not only speculation. The speculation is a process for those who want liberation. Jnana karmadi anavritam. So jnana is the pursuit of those who want liberation. So liberation and wanting liberation, who wants liberation? Liberation is sought by those who find that existence here is too painful. Oh, I don't want to be here because my day-to-day existence has become too painful. I'm sitting on a thorn of rocks. I'm sitting, and every time, I'm sitting, and I'm acting and so on and so forth, I feel as if I'm going to be put through a lot of pain. So I want to be liberated. I just feel that whatever is available there has no taste. I want to leave. Okay, this objective of liberation is better. It is better than fruitive desires. This is the conclusion of our acharyas. Why is it so? It is better than fruitive desires because liberation at least has an objective above the material modes. Fruitive desires have objectives in the material modes. So liberation is above the material modes, and as a consequence, liberation is way better than fruitive desires. But even liberation, jnana, is pratihata. It interrupts the sweetness of the flow of bhakti rasa. Jnana karmadi anavritam. Both of those interrupt the flow of bhakti rasa. That is why Srila Rupa Goswami was very clear that if you want Shuddha Bhakti, then you give up jnana, you give up the pursuit of liberation, you give up the pursuit of fruitive desires. Anukuliyena Krishna Anushilanam. Develop this deep, deep desire of wanting to serve Krishna and Braja. Anukuliyena Krishna Anushilanam. That is Uttama Bhakti. Only Uttama Bhakti, which is completely free of the pangs of fruitive desires and the idea of jnana, only that Uttama Bhakti has the ability to fully satisfy us. So our acharyas, when they write in the Srimad Bhagavatam, they're talking about ahaituki. It is costless. It has no material cost. It has no cause where we are not even qualified. And then it is also apratihata. It should be uninterrupted. Okay? So now let's go back to the verse and we look at it with this particular discussion. Savai pumsam parodharmo yato bhaktir adokshaje ahaituki apratihata yayatma suprasidati. So now the translation by Srila Prabhupada. The supreme occupation for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. What does this mean? Srila Prabhupada is telling us, desire this dharma, the dharma of wanting to render devotional service. Desire this. Okay, don't desire don't desire mixed devotion. Do not desire this fruitive activity. Okay, do not desire fruitive activity. Do not desire mixed devotion, which is jnana and karma. Desire transcendental loving devotional service. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. Okay, so it's clear. Let's go on to 1.2.7. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayati Asu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayad Ahaitukam. By rendering devotional service unto this personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires costless knowledge and detachment from the world. Costless knowledge and detachment from the world. This is the panacea. This particular verse is giving us the panacea. It is telling us what we ought to be doing for us to be able to reach the point of being free from the pangs of this world. Okay, one is come in touch with pure devotional service, where we desire to serve Krishna in transcendental loving service. That was verse 1.2.6, where Srila Prabhupada is using apratihata ahaituki. And then here it is again ahaituki, and then here it should be that you're coming in touch with Krishna, and by coming in touch with Krishna, automatically we become detached. This is an experience which people have when we come in touch with Krishna consciousness at various stages. When we come in touch with Krishna consciousness, slowly, steadily, have you not seen that your desires have changed? Have you not created a new circle of friends? Have you not created a new diet? You see, these are desires that are come because you've come in touch with Krishna. You have desired to eat, you have desired to interact socially, you have desired to do so many things in relationship to Krishna. It's because you came in touch with pure devotional service. Because we have come in touch with pure devotional service in turn has produced detachment. It has produced detachment. It has also produced, our ability to experience great knowledge. What is it knowledge? That knowledge is that we are not this body. We are servants of Krishna. More so, we are servants of Krishna, and there's so much to look forward to in devotional service. You see, there are so many milestones to attain. You see, that's the beauty of what Krishna is talking about in this verse. So again, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayati Asu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayad Ahaitukam. So this Ahaitukam, or it is costless knowledge and detachment. And you come in touch with Krishna. Okay? So to summarize quickly, before we end this session and go for questions, if any, the primary focus has to be that we understand that we need to develop an identity. The identity that we develop induces desires. If the identity is born out of a higher consciousness of wanting to identify with Krishna, such an identity produces desires which are conducive for devotional service. By having such desires, one creates a future which is more conducive for devotional service. Our present, which is a mixed bag, which is a bit complicated, is because we had a past which was complicated. In the past, we didn't desire bhakti. We didn't desire to have, keep Krishna in the center. We have so many other desires. So since we had so many other desires, and Krishna also was one amongst those perhaps in the corner, we have a present today which is quite complicated. So the first thing that we ought to do is to desire a simple life where we will be able to dedicate ourselves in a greater way to engaging in Krishna consciousness. You see, the same problem doesn't exist for one who has already achieved Krishna consciousness, because they can function anywhere, and which is the conclusion which Krishna is talking about, saying that one who is completely immersed in Krishna consciousness, he can do anything he wants. He or she can do anything, okay? And they won't be affected because their consciousness lies in Raja. They're absorbed in Raja. They have no issues. They can be a king. They can be, they can do anything they want. They can have extraordinary worldly interaction and yet be aloof. However, for most people, that is not the case. Since we have not fully established Krishna consciousness and we are trying to reach there, it is important for us to constantly desire to have an environment which will be conducive. Okay, that's the first part. Because it's very important for us to have an environment which is free of too much interference. Something that doesn't take us away from Krishna consciousness, that constantly puts fruitive desires in our mind. Because life is not simple, we constantly desire something else, and this is fruitive desire. Jnana karmadi anavritam. We are either wanting to be liberated from our current situation because we have problems, or we are wanting to have this and have that, and have the little toys of this world, which is going to give us satisfaction. This real jnana karmadi anavritam is because there are complications. Okay, so it is important for us to realize that this original state is not complicated. Prema, Krishna prema, is our objective. There are milestones in Krishna consciousness. Desire those actively, because you're creating your future each day as you sit down for japa. Okay? So I'm going to stop here and see if you have any questions, if at all. Okay. What about certain prayers and kavachas, which are from the Puranas, which offer us some form of fruitive results in the Falashruti? Apart from offering protection, how should we chant these prayers? We can chant the prayers of kavachas and so on and so forth, which have Falashruti. The Falashruti at the end of many of our shlokas are meant to enthuse others, to enthuse people to take it up, because most people have fruitive desires. So to grant fruitive desires, our acharyas have put, the Falashruti, which is also a motivation for many who have fruitive desires. So we can read them, but then since our own intention is for Krishna to actually give us a situation which is conducive for us to go closer to him and for us to be better servants, all of this would again be modified based on the aggregate, not just one particular activity. So you might have 10 different things that you do in the day. Krishna is going to look at the aggregate consciousness, he's going to look at the aggregate desire, and he's going to respond to the aggregate desire, saying that, okay, I'm looking at 10 different desires, and then I'm going to aggregate all those desires and I'm going to build a certain theme. Based on that theme, I'm going to grant your desires. So that is how it works. It doesn't mean that, if you read one sentence here, one sentence there, if there's a Falashruti, it is going to get granted. If it is conducive for Krishna consciousness, so be it. Let it be granted. If it is conducive, it is perfectly all right. Okay, I'm going to give a couple of more minutes. Okay, the previous week, I had a question from Tripti Mataji, and which I couldn't answer. I think it was sent after the fact. The question was that, is our pleasure whilst serving Krishna a spillover effect, or is it like a side effect of being able to give pleasure to his senses? See, the first establishment, or rather the first consciousness that we have to develop, is Krishna consciousness is pleasurable. We are entitled to pleasure because we are pleasure seekers by nature. Our nature is also Satchidananda. Krishna's nature is also Satchidananda. So when our nature comes in touch with Krishna, it is going to give us an extraordinary level of happiness. It is our original state. It is not unnatural. So one doesn't have to really fight out our pleasure when we are trying to serve Krishna's senses. If we receive pleasure while we serve Krishna, that is our true state. That is exactly what we ought to be. That is exactly what our consciousness ought to be, is that we are always happy because our senses are coming in touch with Krishna. Okay? So there is nothing for us to really fight or transform or change if such desires do come, or rather, if such pleasures do come. Okay? So for example, we might prepare prasadam very diligently. We might go to the market, select vegetables very carefully. We bring it home. We are very meditative in terms of being able to prepare and then produce, whatever it is Krishna wants, and then be able to feed him in terms of bhoga. And once you're done with that, the prasadam is to be enjoyed. Because we get pleasure while eating the prasadam, it doesn't mean that we are actually doing something wrong. It is a natural state. That is what I meant to say. It need not be spillover. It's a natural state of, the soul which is filled with ananda, coming in touch with Krishna, who is also the source of all happiness. So, okay, how to manage identity at work? Ajay Govind Prabhu. How to manage identity at work? It's difficult to manage identity at work, and it is not recommended to manage identity at work. In what sense? What I'm talking about is that our desires, the aggregate desires that we have while we are at home, while engaging in sadhana, while engaging in other activities, has to be that our future has to be simple enough for us to be able to engage in Krishna consciousness in a more wholesome way, with little distraction and less confusion and so on and so forth. So that is a predominant desire managing that we ought to do while we are away from work and while we are engaging in the chanting of the holy names, while we are engaging in seva and so on and so forth. While we are at work, we literally absorb ourselves at work and do a good job. You see, Arjuna, let's go back to Arjun. Arjun, he was not asked to be less efficient on the battlefield. The expectation was that Arjun act as an expert in executing whatever was required, keeping in mind, and after choosing that, okay, this is Krishna, I am a servant of Krishna, and I'm engaging in this activity. Okay, that is established. The identity is already established, and the efficiency with which he was supposed to do was at the paramount level. It was not expected that Arjuna was going to be sloppy on the battlefield. So, the similar fashion, we have taken up an identity. We have circumstances where we have to go to work and we have to put in our effort. So, put in the best effort at work. Identify yourself as a worker of such and such organization. Put in your best. There's nothing wrong with it. But when you are away, do not desire more and more of such an identity. Instead, desire to be identifying with the servant of Krishna. Identify with Krishna consciousness, where you want to simplify things so that you could engage service more. I think that's what we need to do. Okay? So the absorption at work is required so that you don't bring anything home. Sometimes when you don't do our things properly, we come back with work and it overwhelms us even more. So it's better for us to focus on work, get it done efficiently, and then come back home and desire that, yes, I was able to do something. Let me come back and do even more when I'm home, for Krishna. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is a fantastic example to understand how to manage work. He was known to be the most efficient deputy magistrate in India, one of the most efficient. He used to dispose of work in 3 hours, compared to what the Englishmen, those days used to take around 3 days to accomplish. The Englishman used to take 3 days to accomplish, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur used to complete it in 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Okay, where was this special capacity? Afterwards, he used to come home, spend time, and then he used to wait for people to give them audience before he went to work. He really disposed of a tremendous amount of work. He was not known to be inefficient. That is number one. He wrote 100 books. He raised 11 children. Okay, he was an administrator. He was a lot of things to a lot of people. He met with people to solve their problems on a daily basis. So imagine this capacity which has come in, where someone is 100% focused in their identity of being Krishna's servant. Okay, and that gives them this extraordinary bandwidth and leeway for them to be very efficient at work, where you accomplish more in a shorter period of time and then absorb yourself in Krishna consciousness. So one has to realize the difference between the two. One is where we are desiring, professional success, and we are actively desiring it, and to such an extent that it overwhelms our need even for Krishna consciousness. As a consequence, professional success comes in, but it comes in with a cost. It comes in with a cost where we are not able to fully devote time to Krishna consciousness in certain ways. Rather than doing that, we understand that Krishna consciousness is our goal. Krishna Prema is our only goal, and we act in Krishna Prema, rather we act in Krishna consciousness, and we desire that, but we execute whatever Krishna is allowing us to execute during the day. Okay, so that's the idea. The idea is to manage desires outside of Krishna consciousness. That is all you need to do. We need to desire Krishna consciousness and not desire other things, and simply accept things as they are and put in our very best. If a promotion comes, so be it. It's nice. Nothing wrong with it. But then to become so absorbed of wanting to get promoted, becoming so absorbed of wanting a bonus, wanting a raise, wanting this, wanting that, then it becomes a problem, because that becomes our overriding consciousness. And then Krishna consciousness becomes secondary, it becomes second tier. That's the issue which I'm trying to address here. Sure. Okay, I don't see any more questions. If there are any more, then I will address it in the following week, or feel free to write in Facebook, or perhaps on the website as well after the video has been posted. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.